It comes out of the oven and your entire house is filled with this tantalizing, amazing smell that you are just drawn to. Like, you know, you just gotta have some of it. What am I talking about? I'm talking about bread. I have already a cup of warm water, and I am going to get my yeast out of the freezer. And I keep my yeast in the freezer because if I kept it in the refrigerator, it would die pretty quickly. So I keep it in the freezer. So we're gonna add to our mixing bowl with a dough hook already in 1 cup of water. And now we add the yeast. I keep my yeast in a plastic bag so that I can get as much air out of it as I can. And to this, we're going to add 2.5 teaspoons of yeast. Now, if this were double the recipe, it actually makes a little more sense and easier to do. And usually I do double this recipe. So some of my measurements, you might go, what? Why are you doing this? It's kind of an odd measurement. Well, because I had to cut it in half just for the purposes of this. So this is my 1.5, the second teaspoon. So 2.5 teaspoons of yeast. And I'm gonna let that bloom. Next, I'm gonna add my sugar. I've got 2 tablespoons of sugar here, so double it, you're gonna get 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons. I wanna add the sugar next so that it just kind of has something, that yeast has something to eat. And then right away, I'm going to add about 1 cup of flour so that it keeps going. Now we're gonna let it rest for a little bit as it's got something to chew on. I've begun to stir the flour into the yeast and the water and let that go for a little bit. Next, I'm adding my butter, which comes out to being about 3 3/4 tablespoons of butter. So because that's kind of an odd measurement, if you double that, it's 1/3. So 1/2 of a cup of butter. And make sure it's not too hot yet. We don't want to kill the yeast. All right, to that I'm going to continue by adding more flour. I'm going to remove my dough hook once again, because obviously I've got some flour on the top of it. I don't want that. And to this, we're going to add, normally for a double recipe, it's a teaspoon and a half, so this is 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. I like adding the salt as late in the recipe as I can usually, just because the salt can kill the yeast. And as I said before, I've killed so many bread recipes. I'm the #1 arch enemy of bread for years and years. So, okay, I'm just gonna let that kind of work its way in. And I think at this point I can just put the dough hook on and let it go. As you can see, I've got all of the dough incorporated, but what's really important at this stage is not to stop. A lot of times people just say, okay, it's all mixed, I'm done. But with this type of bread recipe, you don't want to stop. You want to beat the heck out of it. And let's do it. All right, now I feel confident this is really well mixed. I'm gonna take my dough off of my hook. When you touch the dough, it should feel kind of warm. It should have like a nice little, it should be a little bit sticky, and that's a good way to tell, oh yeah, this is good. Now we're going to leave our dough alone for about 1 hour and just let it rise. It should double in volume, and then at that point, we're going to put it in a loaf pan. Okay, it's been an hour, and as you can see, our dough is beautiful. It is doubled its size, and it's ready for the second proofing. The second proofing doesn't take as long as the first proofing. It just needs a chance to come back to where it was. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it out of our container with clean hands, always with clean hands. And what I like to do is just kind of, I don't necessarily punch it down. Some people like punch it. I don't do that. I just manipulate it into the shape that I want. And if I'm doing a double loaf, I divide it in half and I actually weigh it out so that I know exactly how much I have. Now once I've got that done and I've got it in my pan, and you notice I didn't spray anything in the pan. I didn't grease it at all because I don't need to. The dough or the type of pan I'm using, which is a silicone pan, I don't have to worry about it with this dough. If I were using a metal pan, I would certainly put butter on the inside or something so that when I want to remove it from the loaf pan, I can get it out. But with this one, I don't have to. I also like to take a knife and cut right down the center to give it some room to expand. It actually helps the loaf come up. I'm going to put my pan in the oven after about 40 minutes. It really needs that time to proof and come back. And so after I'm done with that, I will put it in the oven and I will bake it for something around 35 minutes, and then it will be done. When you cut a piece of bread, it's very important, especially on a fresh loaf like this one, is that when you cut it, you don't crush the loaf. So what you want to have is a firm grip, but not a crushing grip. So by that, I mean you have full control of your hand and you're keeping that loaf steady. And when you cut, you don't push down and mash. You should have a serrated knife. This is a bread knife, and it can be even a serrated knife like this one, or even a more of a flat serrated knife like this one. Now, it doesn't matter which one you choose, so long as you continue to use it the same. So it's all the same cutting for this. So I'm going to use my bread knife and I'm going to saw, and I'm going to let the serration do the work and cut into this loaf. And I'm just going to take my time. I don't need to worry, the bread's not going to go anywhere. Nice, even cut. There you go. A little bit of butter. This is going to be awesome. And what I love the most about making bread is that when I make it at home by myself and there's nobody around, I always get the heel. If you've been to a restaurant that serves those little loaves on the table that are fresh bread, this tastes just like that. It's warm and fresh and delicious. With bread, I really struggled on how to keep this nice because there really isn't a bag that fits it. At least the gallon freezer bags don't fit it, or the gallon regular size bags. So I really wanted something that I could freeze bread, because sometimes my family eats a lot of bread and sometimes it doesn't. It's like feast or famine with them. So in order to keep the bread nice, I used to have a bread box, but it took up far too much counter space in my tiny kitchen, and I just couldn't have it. So what I ended up doing is making a bag that would fit at least 2 loaves of bread, and I could put it in either the refrigerator or the freezer. What I ended up doing is going to the fabric store and getting pole fabric. Now this is the same fabric that they use to make diapers and other things like that. But for this purpose, it is awesome. And all you have to do is just make a bag. And I just put a drawstring on the end of mine. It keeps the bread very, very fresh. I don't have to worry about it. I can either freeze the bread or I can just refrigerate it. And my bread stays good for as long as I need it to. If I could have bread every day, all day, I think I'd be so happy. Too bad you're not supposed to eat it that much. Why can't we eat bread all the time? Why? Why is it so evil? Why do people tell us that bread is evil? Bread is delicious. Bread is addictive. Bread is very addictive. Bread. love doing this. This wire is my friend. It's my friend. Stick that down your pants.